My name's Mary Kate Erdman. I'm an orthopedic trauma surgeon. So to do that, I go through medical school and then orthopedic surgery residency and a fellowship specifically in trauma surgery. That basically means fixing fractures, and that's anything other than the spine and the hands. So it's upper extremity, lower extremity, pelvis, ranges from little outpatient ankle fractures to big injuries where people have a high energy of trauma and have pelvis fractures and open fractures and like more emergency kind of conditions.
And then what made you choose your career path?
I always liked orthopedics. My mom had little injuries and stuff growing up that she dragged me to the doctor for. So I got to see a lot of x-rays and kind of see that field early on. I thought x-rays were really cool. I liked the fact that you could kind of point to a reason for a problem. It's very big picture. It's very driven by physics, basically, of three-dimensional space and forces and material properties and things that fit more with an engineering kind of mindset, which is what I studied in undergrad. So I did mechanical engineering sort of by design to do that in preparation for orthopedics. I feel like patients understand what I'm talking about when I show an x-ray and their bones in like four pieces and it's not supposed to be. It's a lot easier to understand than something like a complex kidney disease where you're asking patients to take medication for something that they just can't really wrap their heads around.
Yeah. And then were there any specific moments in your career that really inspired or motivated you?
When I was a fourth year medical student, so in medical school, the first 2 years are basically in a classroom, and or at least in my school and in a lot of them. And then the third and fourth years are in more of a hospital or clinic setting and not so much book kind of learning. It's more on the job learning. And in fourth year, for some of the specialties, you go do these away rotations. It's like a month long audition or like job interview for certain programs. So I had done those, and then I came back to my home program and was tagging along with the general surgery trauma team. And it was a night shift in the middle of the night. A patient, probably in her 40s, got hit by a truck. And I had gone and done all of these away rotations in orthopedics, and a lot of them were trauma based. So I kind of was more comfortable with a lot of the orthopedic stuff than the general surgery residents because that's not their specialty. So this patient comes in really sick, big injuries, and the general surgery attending said, call ortho, get ortho on the phone right now. So they already dialed the number and they didn't even know what to say. And I just kind of blurted out, tell them it's an open book pelvic fracture as the medical student, which is very presumptuous to say anything at all. But it was probably the biggest isolated point I can identify where I liked that trauma environment. I liked taking that chaotic environment and distilling it down to what do we need to know? What do we need to act on? And what's the next step in this rather than getting kind of caught up in the frenzy.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then were there any specific people or mentors that made a significant impact on you?
Oh, dozens. At every step, there's been people that have been, I'd say the majority have been like champions that have been very helpful as far as normalizing experiences or putting things into perspective I may want to look into. And the big thing with mentorship is a good mentor tells you the things you don't even need to know or you don't even know you need to know. So telling me about like young leadership development programs or grant opportunities and things I didn't even know existed and wouldn't have even known to ask about. I had one attending when I was a medical student on one of these away rotations that she asked me if she could write a letter for me, and that was 2016 or so. And I stay in contact with her every few weeks or every few months since then. So she's been an awesome mentor. And then people through residency and fellowship, I'm always looking for second opinions and thoughts on things and get their own experiences and perspectives. There's another thing that people talk about of near peers, where it's not like a mentor doesn't have to be 10 years ahead of you. Where I did fellowship, there's 5 of us per year. So I have a text thread with all of my former co-fellows, and we just kind of are constantly talking. And it's a mentorship, but sort of through your own peer group. So it's not so much like that high up in the chain, but just the people right around you that are going through the same things you're going through.
Yeah, okay. And then when you initially entered this field, were there any struggles that made you reconsider your career choice? And if there were any, how did you push through that?
Medical school was the hardest for part of that. And it was interesting because within orthopedics, on the other end of things, where now I'm in the field, I part of the fabric of the orthopedic community. And when medical students or college students tell me they want to go into orthopedics, they want to look into it, I have the same feedback that a lot of people from orthopedics gave to me at that time, which was, it's great. I love my job. The job satisfaction is great. The type of work we do is great. You can do it, just study, work hard, etc. When I was in medical school, when I told people I wanted to do orthopedics as a first or second year, it was usually That's a really competitive specialty. You should have a plan B. And it is practical advice in some aspects, but in other ways, you can't have a plan B without having a plan A. And the people who told me to focus more of my energy on the plan B were not people from orthopedics. They were in family medicine, pediatrics, infectious disease, internal medicine, just not people that had even gone through it themselves. And they weren't spending any time talking about how to develop a good plan A. It was more, well, that's really hard. You might not get to do that. So you probably shouldn't even try. That was a point that having that message kind of reiterated over and over made the determination to go into orthopedics. It felt like so high stakes because the message you're hearing is it's so competitive and only a number of people get to do it. And so everything got heightened and everything became more stressful. Being on the other end of it, I really kind of only stuck with it because that's just what I really wanted to do. And I was pretty stubborn about it. And I just didn't like anything else the way I liked orthopedics. So I heard their message of have a plan B. And, not everyone does get to do exactly what they want to do, but it was the overwhelming feedback early on in medical school. So it took a while to kind of get that messaging out of my brain as the primary thing that comes to mind. That was probably the biggest barrier.
Yeah, that sounds really challenging. And then, if any, what kinds of adversaries have you faced, but like specifically because of your gender or background?
Not as much as I expected. It's the least diverse specialty in medicine. Orthopedics is very strongly dominated by male gender, by the white population. It is not a diverse field. I feel like I find more so is that the older generations, that's less of an issue than some of the colleagues kind of more around my like level in training. So I feel like the older generations, it just seems like they've seen everything and they just want people who are going to work hard and be good surgeons. And it doesn't matter who you are. And that's kind of the opposite of what I expected because there's the good old boys club and people not wanting to change orthopedics. That I just didn't really get that. It's actually the younger generations that I think there's very subtle, but some differences in like maybe my assessment of something or my treatment plan is second guessed a little bit more than my male colleagues. A male resident may argue with me in the OR about what the next step should be, where they don't really do that with my male colleagues. It's been more in the leadership position of people junior to me or people in my peer group, very subtly, but maybe not having the same kind of respect for me that's demonstrated for a colleague that's a male that has the exact same training, same position, same year, same everything. But people don't argue with him in his OR the same way.
Yeah, okay. So, what do you perceive to be the largest barrier or obstacle to female leadership or girls becoming like orthopedic surgeons?
Two components to that. So, barrier to becoming orthopedic surgeons, I think there is a culture that it's just kind of like the sports jock locker room culture. It varies program to program. Like the program I'm at, it doesn't really have too much of that. Where I did residency a little bit more so, but even that has changed drastically. Even in the 5 years I was a resident, from when I started to when I ended, the culture and the atmosphere was really different. You can increase your numbers up to a certain extent, but until you're really universally valuing all aspects of a resident or trainee, I think that's going to be hard to move the needle too much. There's just such a strong bro mentality in orthopedics that it's going to take a long time, I think, to change that. As far as leadership, there's definitely a concerted effort to try to promote females and underrepresented minorities into more prominent roles and positions like section leaders and chairs and program directors. And there's two parts to that. One is it's a great thing that we should try to diversify the people at the top, because then there's a pipeline issue that if you don't have senior leadership that is of whatever minority group you want to identify, then you don't have the same people, like same trainees and juniors looking to those leadership positions saying, well, if he or she can do it, then I can do it. But the other thing about it is there's a concern for this term called unpaid work. And it's quite a double-edged sword. If you get an assignment, your boss says, hey, I have this opportunity for you to work on this thing. That could be a good thing, but sometimes that is given preferentially to women or underrepresented minorities, and they're not getting paid for it. They're not getting a title for it. They're just getting extra work. And it seems like it's a compliment, but it is something that does tie up your time doing something that you're maybe not paid to do. It's not promoting you. It's not paying you. It's just, here's this busy work and I trust you and I know you'll get it done. And I know you're so hungry to be here that you're going to say yes to anything I offer you. And that's something that I think is something to be aware of, something I'm always trying to separate in my job, because there's the surgeon job, the teacher job, and then there's a lot of administrative stuff at my level, that being on different committees, trying to advance initiatives within the hospital. And if you say yes to everything, suddenly your time is just eaten up, and it's not really what you're there for. So there's definitely a push to get people in leadership positions that are from a minority group, but with that caveat that you should exercise caution, that some of that stuff is not really actually the leadership position that it's kind of billed to be.
Yeah, okay. And then why do you think that diversity in a workplace is important, and in particular, gender diversity?
With medicine, I think a big thing is just being able to connect with patients. And I feel like it comes out in a lot of ways where patients seem to be more comfortable disclosing things to, I don't know if it's just to me, to females or whatever it is, but traditionally there's that sort of maternalistic, less judgmental and more like soft, fluffy outside of the female communication style, that I think patients tend to just be a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more open, more willing to cry in the office, or things like that. There's studies that also show that the outcomes of female surgeons are objectively better than male surgeons. I'm not sure what to make of that, but I do feel like I have a really good connection with my patients. That drives outcomes for sure. If they're honest with me, I'm honest with them. We're on the same page about what's your rehab going to look like. How much weight can you actually put on your leg? Do you still need to use crutches? Do you need to go to therapy more and work harder? I don't know if that's a gender thing, but that's kind of the only difference I can really point to.
And then, like, if you've gotten any, like, I guess, bad comments, how has your ability to react or respond to those comments undermining your abilities changed as you've gotten more experience?
Yeah, so like the microaggression stuff, it came up a lot more when I was a resident. One of the big things you talk about in residency is how you introduce yourself to patients. Like you introduce yourself by your first name. Some people say I'm Dr. So and so, but in a resident role, yeah, you are a doctor, but it does feel a little disingenuous sometimes to kind of put yourself in a position where it seems like you're the doctor, like you're the attending, but trying to thread that needle, people do different things. So I started by using my first name, saying like, hi, I'm Mary Kate. I'm the resident. I'm working with Dr. So-and-so today. I pretty quickly found out that was putting me in a position where patients had no idea that I was also a doctor. So I might have a whole encounter with them, talk about everything, and attending would basically rubber stamp what I said and say hi to the patient. And then the patient would say, well, I never saw a doctor today. Even if I would talk all about a surgery that we did the day before, the patient would then say, like, so you're physical therapy, right? Even wearing a white coat and a badge that says physician in like 2-inch letters. It just happened a lot more as a resident. It doesn't happen as much as an attending. Every once in a while, it might be like, oh, so you were in the surgery? That will happen now with a patient in clinic. Because one of the things about trauma is I don't really get a relationship with my patients before surgery. I'll meet them in pre-op and say, hi, I'm Dr. Erdman. I'm going to fix your femur fracture today. They never remember meeting me in pre-op, and then I see them in clinic, and then they're surprised, like, so you were in there? Like, yeah, I was actually the boss in there. I did your surgery. And now I get really positive feedback from patients of like, oh, that's cool. That's awesome. I haven't really had any time I can think of specifically of, I don't know if I trust you because you're a female, or, maybe I want to get a second opinion. And I just haven't really had that. If anything, it's been more of a positive that patients kind of recognize that that's not usually what their orthopedic surgeon looks like, and they're more excited about it. One time when I was a resident, my favorite story was I was rounding on a patient, and the patient was an older gentleman and his wife was sitting next to him, and he made some comment, not just absent-minded, of something like asking if I was physical therapy, if I was the nurse. And his wife smacked him across the side of the arm. She's like, that's your doctor. And he was super apologetic. It was just like such a funny moment that he just got called out so hard by his wife.
Yeah, that's great. And then what traits do you have that help you deal with the adversity of being a woman in these like male-dominated fields? And how would you suggest someone else try to cultivate those traits?
Knowing your subject matter and being thoughtful, well trained, and really trying not to second guess yourself. It's always good to be critical of yourself. I'm a big advocate of being critical of your own work, but it's a fine line being critical and then being critical in a way that's destructive, where you're comparing or you're over analyzing every little thing, like, oh, well, I wonder why that person asked that surgeon and not me, and just let some of that stuff go and run your race. So I think being hyper focused on your goals and not looking outside and not comparing and not worrying about, am I not getting this because of whatever barrier. You're never going to be able to, or rarely going to be able to prove that a limit to your progress is specifically based on some kind of prejudice. It's always this fear that you do have, but if you spend too much time perseverating on that, it becomes really destructive. And then you see everything through that lens, and every little infraction you start to attribute to that. And then it becomes this cycle that you put yourself in this position where you're worried that everyone's kind of not out to get you. That sounds a little too paranoid, but that there's just going to be this permanent cap on what you can do because that's how the world is. And there's an element of, there's reality that the numbers of women in orthopedics and leadership positions, underrepresented minorities, there is certainly a different path than traditionally has been there. But I think the biggest weapon you can arm yourself with is good knowledge and training. And then if you have that and you've got a strong resume, you've got good experiences, and you have integrity, then none of the other stuff matters.
Yeah, okay. And then just for a final question, what's some advice that you would give to other girls who want to become orthopedic surgeons?
Get exposed to the field. So if you love orthopedics, you should do it. There's no other way to say that. If you think you might like it, one of my fears is that there's such a push to diversify that there's this push like, you should do it, you should do it. And what I wouldn't want is someone to select that field because they have a mission to prove the world wrong and to prove that they can do it if they don't actually love the work. It is a hard job. I'm not a morning person, and I'm up at usually 5 a.m. every day, and it crushes me, but I love what I do, and I can't imagine doing anything else. I'm by nature very competitive. So if I had people telling me you can't do this, you can't do that, it makes me want to do that thing more. So that would be the one concern, is if you feel like you're heading a direction because you've got a point to prove. It's your life and it's a career and it's a whole commitment. That make sure you know what you're getting into, because there is a big attrition rate for women who go into orthopedics, into academics, into some of those positions where it's kind of high pressure, and they don't stick around. So I don't know exactly what the cause of that is, and there's a lot of studies being done to understand that better. But I do think there might be an element of that people are choosing a field maybe too early, maybe before they know for sure that they like that. And that's a big problem with our medical school education, that usually orthopedics is not really built into the regular rotations. So you might get 2-3 weeks as a third year student. You don't really know what you're doing or what you're looking at. You're just kind of a guest for a couple of weeks. And then you do away rotations, which are designed to make you want to like the field. Then the next thing you know, you're like third, fourth year resident, and you're saying, I don't know if I actually want to do this. So I think that's something to proceed with caution. Just make sure if you love it, absolutely do it, but make sure you love it.
Okay. So that's all the questions that I have for today, and thank you so much for meeting with me.